Hello, welcome to Access to Higher Education Diplomas. We're going to be looking today at the Independent Academic Study, or generally known as the IAS. This is quite a large piece of work which you are going to be doing pretty much on your own with some guidance from myself, hopefully. Um, but we thought we'd do a little tutorial for you just to talk you through what's required because it is an unusual assignment because there's three options as to what you can do. So I'm going to talk you through all of them hopefully. But do remember, if there's something I haven't said or if you have any other questions, do contact me and I can discuss it with you. Okay, let's just sort of think about it then. All the access to higher education diplomas has this unit. It's a 6 credit unit, so it's quite a large unit, and it is graded, so distinction, merit, pass. So if you get 6 credits, there's a chance of 6 distinctions, 6 merits. So it's quite an important unit, really, for you. And it gives you the opportunity to evidence all the components of the QAA grading standard 3. So grading standard 3 really requires you to demonstrate some sort of autonomy and independent working, okay? And therefore, this is a student-led unit. So really, you're going to pick your own topic, and then you're going to do your own piece of work. You are not, as in some of your other essays and assignments, really reflecting on the resources that you've been given and answering questions about it. This is something that you are going to do by yourself. So you can't really focus it on resources that you've already got. What you need to do, you can actually build on something that maybe you've been discussing in another class, but you can't just regurgitate what you've done in a class. That's my job, is to check that and make sure that you don't do that, really. Okay, so because it's student-led, it meets the grading standards 3 and the core expectations. What we have done, though, as I said, you have 3 different briefs, 3 different styles of assignments, because some people prefer to do one thing, some prefer to do another. So as it is a student-led one, we're actually giving you choices here. So the 3 briefs, they all cover the same learning outcomes, but the evidence requirements might be slightly different, but they would all meet the criteria, okay? And they're going to be summarized in the next few slides. So I'm going to go over all 3 briefs so that you can make an informed choice. Okay, let's start first of all with the topic, because you're going to choose the topic, not me. However, you do need to do it in discussion with me or whoever does the role that I have. So it needs to be related to your diploma that you're studying. You can build upon some work you've done in other assignments. As I said, you can sort of, so if you studied a particular thing that you found really interesting, but were thinking, oh, I wish we'd had time to sort of look at that, then this might be something that you could do. You might be able to do a bit of research on that. Or it can be a topic that you haven't studied at all, but you sort of think, oh, it'd be really nice if I could do something about that. Or this has brought up an idea in my head. I think I'd like to go off and read about this. You can actually use that as one of your topics, okay? So just to make sure that you're on the right track, I do want you to check in with me before you really start work and tell me, A, what the topic is, so I can just, help you refine it a bit. You might pick on something that might be a bit too ambitious to do within the timescales that you've got or within the word counts that you've got. Or I might feel it's not connected enough. So you do need to run that by me. And also, when you're making your choice of which of the three approaches you're going to take. We need to connect the topic to the approach that you're going to take. And again, you need to run that by me just to make sure that you're on the right track, rather than you do loads of work and then me say to you, well, this was never going to answer it, or you find out later on. So, okay, so let's think about that. Okay, so brief one is a literature review. So those of you, some of you love doing literature review, some of you hate it. For those of you who are maybe fed up writing quite a few essays, you might fancy just doing a literature review. So if you've had a look at the study skills on research, if you've already done that, you might just want to refresh yourself, because part of that is doing a literature review. If you haven't done it yet, it might be worth you just sort of following the online course for that, just to give you a bit of an idea. Or you may have done literature reviews in other pieces of study that you've got. If you haven't done a literature review before, then I suggest, I mean, you may think that it's a bit too much for you to take on now, or you might just want to look into it and see what it entails, or have a chat with myself. Okay. So ideally, a literature review would be written as a report. Okay, so it's a fairly formal thing, but you can sort of put different ideas into it. It's a critical review of literature, so you don't just regurgitate the literature. You need to be fairly critical of it. What are the strengths and weaknesses of the pieces of literature? You know, does it work? Does it answer your question? Does it not? The whole assignment is around 3,000 to 4,000 words. So it's a bit larger than some of the assignments that you might have done already. So bear that in mind. Okay, so you need to do, for such a large review, you do need to do a bit of planning. You need to sort of map it out really before you do it. There is a structure that we've recommended, and I would really like you to follow it, because each item on the structure is mapped to all the assessment criteria. So if you really hit the right parts of the structure, you should hit all the assessment criteria. I've also given you some notional word allocations, and it is quite well balanced. So I would again suggest you follow the guidance. I mean, you don't say, where I say 150 words, okay, you could do 170 on that one and a bit less in somewhere else. You can move around a bit, like you probably do in any of your assignments. But please use it as a guide, so that you know which items in the structure are like more important and need the big word counts really. It gives you a bit of a layout as well, because it's a literature review, and it would be something like if you were handing it in at university, we want you to try and get into that style. So you need to create a title page, which includes the title of your study, your name, your college, and the date that you've created it. You also need to try and create a contents page, because it's going to be sort of fairly large. So you might have different areas or different headings that you can put into a contents page. Because again, with a literature review, you're allowed to have different headings. Like with an essay, you don't normally have headings, but with a literature review, you can. If you're working in Word, there is a tool that just makes a contents page for you, so it's not too bad actually. And then you need an abstract or an executive summary. I've suggested about 150 words here, which is just a paragraph which sums up, the contents that you're doing it in. This is a literature review around this topic, what the purpose is, what sort of methodology you are. I'm going to look at X amount of pieces of literature from different sources. These are some of the outcomes and what the conclusion is. The abstract is really created so that if another academic wanted to have a look at your work, instead of having to read every page, they would read the abstract and think, oh yes, this is answering the question that I want. Yes, I'll use this and I'll read it in more detail. It's a way to help people, researchers and people who are studying, to decide whether they want to use it or not. If you're not quite sure how to write an abstract, I mean, any piece of research you find, especially if it's produced at a university, will have a small abstract at the beginning. So let that guide you a little bit, really, when you're looking at stuff. Okay, the next few parts of it is these are the headings. You don't actually have to use every single heading, but I want you to use the actual structure. Okay, so an introduction should always have an introduction. I've suggested about 150 words, and you need to define what is the purpose of the topic. What's the context for reviewing the literature? What are you going to do? Why are you reviewing these bits of literature? Why have you chosen these pieces of literature? What's the sequence and scope of the review? Like, how big is it going to be? What are you including? What's not? Why, maybe? You need at least 5 substantive sources relevant. So substantive, I mean, not a source of just 2 lines, but a source that's got at least a couple of pages that you can read and sort of summarize as part of your literature review. Okay, so they need to be fairly chunky because otherwise you can't really comment. If it's just a piece of information that's 2 lines long, you can't really comment on the strengths and weaknesses of it and whether it will, how much it contributes to answering your question. And then the methodology, really. Okay, now this is the substance of your literature review. Suggested you about 2,500 words on that. And you really need to sort of think about how to organize that. You need to do a plan, really, before you do this. And you need to think about whether you're going to organize it by themes when you're going to report on it, or are you just going to do chronological literature? So say if you're looking at something maybe over a historical context, I don't know, computing over the last 50 years or something like that. You might find it works chronologically, start at the beginning with the earliest piece of research up to some of the more recent stuff and showing how things have changed. Otherwise, if you're doing maybe a question on psychology where there's lots of different arguments, you may follow particular themes. So it really depends on what your topic and question is. So whichever piece of literature you use, it's really, really important to identify what the strengths and weaknesses of those sources are. Okay. So why is it good? Why is it bad? Does it answer does it go well enough to answer your question? Does it not really answer your question? What are the holes in this piece of literature? What did they miss? Bearing in mind they're probably quite good academics, they usually do quite well. But on the other hand, as things get older, other people will come up and say, yes, but you didn't look at that. So bear that in mind. Now think of it as a literature review. It's not an essay. You're not writing the answer to the question. You are reviewing the literature. You are reviewing, so secondary research. You're looking at what other people have written and identifying, and you're looking at the quality of that research as to whether it's answering the question or not. And the criticism might not be that their research isn't very good. It might be that you've chosen wrongly because, once you've read into it, they haven't answered the question or they go off into a different direction. So you need to think about that. And that's okay to reflect because there is a little bit at the end where it tells you, how well have you done, and you might talk about maybe your choices weren't that great. That's okay though, because self-reflection is really important in any one of these. So the methodology, remember, this is, we got the body, this is where you're telling me about the different pieces of research, strengths and weaknesses of them. Okay. And please, with this, you really don't forget your citations and a reference list at the end. So next thing is results. You should summarize your findings. So you've highlighted a few things, and I just want that in a summary, a fairly objective summary. Okay. So it might not be data you're looking at here. You might just be summarizing the strengths and weaknesses, like this and this is strong in this areas. This piece of research is strong in that area, but doesn't really say enough about, doesn't really give me enough in that area. So it just, once you've discussed it up there, you're just summarizing it. Discussion, you've got about 250 words there. So you're analyzing and interpret. So you've got your sort of results and methodology. It's just pulling it together, really. Refer back to your research aims and discuss to what extent the results have answered your question. Is it good enough? Do you need to do more? Have you met your project aims? Did some of these pieces of research surprise you? You thought they were going to answer your question, and maybe they just didn't at all, even though the title and the topic led you to believe that they would. That's okay. This is what we often find over years of academic research. Did you find one source more convincing than another source? Or the other way around, was one just really not as good as some of the others? You sort of think, well, why do people read that one? Because it really doesn't answer the question as well. So this is your discussion. Next bit is conclusion. This is really just summing up everything you've looked at. As you know, when you do a conclusion to an essay, you don't bring in anything new in a conclusion. You're just summarizing it, really. Again, have you answered your question? Have you met your research aims? Did you pick the right sources of information? Is there room for some future research? From what you've read, has any of them answered your question completely? Is future research needed? Or are there some bits of research that you haven't read that maybe you should have? It's fine. And the last bit is an evaluation, where you're actually looking at how well you did this piece of work. So it feels like it's the same sort of thing, but it's not really. The conclusion is just summing up what you found out from your literature reviews. Remember, don't get taken into the body of the detail of it. It's like, how good is that piece of literature at answering the question? So don't get involved in whys and wheres of the actual detail of the question. It's how well that answers it. You've got to stand away from it a little bit and think, is this useful? Is it not useful for the question? But the evaluation is, did you do it well? Did you choose well? What were your strengths and weaknesses in doing it? Maybe my strength was picking a lot, but maybe I picked too many and couldn't decide which were the best ones or something like that. Did you need to increase the scope? I've said at least 5 sources. I'd probably like to see more because it's quite a big piece of work. 5 is the absolute minimum. If you do less than that, not sure if I could pass you on that criteria. Okay, there needs to be at least 5 sources, but I'd like to see more. I'd like to see at least 8 or something like that, because it shows that you've done a wider sort of look. So one of the questions is, should I have looked at more sources? Were the sources I looked at, did they really do the job? And is it my decision making? What made me decide to do those sources? What would I do differently if I had to do this project again in 6 months' time? Okay. So there are things that are not included in the word count, but they absolutely have to be there. Okay, and please don't forget this, because again, if you don't do it, there's a couple of criteria that you'll miss out. One of them is references, but you know that anyway because you've all been happily writing assignments. Please ensure that you acknowledge all your public sources of information, including any AI generated sources. So if you do take a bit of research from AI, please reference it. Okay. If you have a look at the referencing guide, if you're at all unsure, remember there is a referencing guide up there. And our style is Harvard, so don't use APA or anything else. Harvard is what the awarding body wants. Harvard is what you need to use. Okay. Appendices. You can add some appendices because you need your initial research proposal. It's not included in the word count. You don't need to write an awful lot, but I need at least a paragraph, a brief commentary on how you chose your proposal. What sort of things did you think about? What made you look for certain resources? Just give me a gist of what was going on. This is purely subjective, okay, in the way you write it. I looked at this, I felt like doing that. It's fine to write that because this is part of a sort of reflection really on your research proposal. And did you speak to me? What sort of feedback did you get? What made you go one way or the other? Okay, so just a little paragraph on what got you there. And then your research plan. So you need to create a plan. You need to jot it out, really. I'm happy for it to be in a chart form. It usually works out better like that way. With your key milestones, bits you're going to do, what order you're going to do things in, just to show a logical brain, really, that you've worked through it. And expected completion dates. I know they're all going to be, very close together. You're going to do one bit one day and a little bit the next day and everything, but that's fine. But just to get you into the practice of writing a research plan. Okay, so that's that one. So the second option you have is the extended essay. Those of you, some of you quite like doing literature reviews. As I said, you might have done them before. Some of you are a bit cagey about them, but quite like writing essays. Fine, okay. So if you would prefer to write an essay, it's again an agreed or negotiated essay title. There needs to be significant piece of research involved in it, okay? So you need to spend time looking for sources, looking for information, looking for data, whatever you're choosing. So once you're thinking about a topic, again, run it through with me so that we're happy that it will be big enough to take this assignment. It cannot be, again, taught material you've already studied for a unit. So again, I don't want you to regurgitate an essay on something that you've had like for 4 weeks of teaching on. It can overlap a little bit with it. So it's something that might, as I said, it builds on. So it's going to be the same as your first brief in that respect. Your essay needs to be within 3,000 and 4,000 words, preferably, I would say, 3,500 to 4,000, because that will give you the substance to meet all the criteria. Continuous prose, no headings, please, because it's an essay, not a report, not a briefing document. Okay. If you were doing something scientific where there might be data involved, you might need to put a couple of headings in, but really you shouldn't. Avoid that. And remember the language of an essay: third person, okay, academic, reflective. Your finished essay, you should still need a title page with your name, college, title of the unit, and the date that you've done it. Okay, so because it's an essay, the structure isn't so large as maybe it is for the literature review, but you still need to be 3 areas. Again, please don't put headings, just make it clear. There should be a good introduction area, maybe a paragraph or so. 250 to 500 words, I recommend, which interprets the essay title and just explains how you're going to respond to it. So what is the structure? What are you going to do? Okay. Then the second part is the main body, which is a large part of your writing, 2,000, 3,000 words, maybe a bit more if you want. Okay. And this is all your key information where you set out your arguments and some of the analysis. Okay. And this will obviously be a few paragraphs. Don't forget to sort of link and signpost one paragraph to another. And to do that, think about those linking and signposting words. Furthermore, generally we can see. However, if you want to sort of change the direction, on the other hand, a different view would be. So remember to think about that. You can start new paragraphs like that. So you can move smoothly from one paragraph to another. Make sure within each paragraph or each, little argument change or key information change, you introduce it, you define, you tell me what the evidence is, and then you do some analysis, really. And keep it focused on one point before you move on to the other. If you jump between points, it gets messy and a lot of information can get lost that way. Then, of course, you will move on to your conclusion. So your conclusion, again, nothing new in a conclusion, always a summary of the key points from the main discussion. And really make sure that conclusion is focused on the essay question, nothing new, haven't gone off in the wrong direction. In your conclusion, you consider, have you answered the initial question? Have you met your research aims? So identify there, maybe you might find that you might need further research in some area. That's acceptable and that's pretty normal. Okay, to say that. But you do need to have tried to met it as well as you can. But if you say, well, I cannot find, I wanted to answer this question and I've answered it to a point, but there's some research, I cannot find any research that goes in this direction that I think could really be useful. So just, identify that, because there's nothing wrong with looking for future research. That's how sort of academic life goes, really. At the conclusion, as usual, you need your reference list, Harvard referencing again, even your AI sources, and more and more, there'll be more and more research coming from AI. So you do need to give it a citation and you do need to give it a reference as well. Additionally, in appendices, the same as in briefing 1, you need a research proposal. A little brief commentary on how we refined your proposal, the sort of discussion that you had, hopefully with yourself, and the sort of methodology, how you worked it all out, just how you sort of got your head together around it, really. And a research plan with the key milestones and expected completion dates. Okay, I'm not going to hold you to those dates, really, so just write what fits. But it's more important that I see a plan with the milestones, so I know the order that your thinking was in. And a little evaluation, which is, again, your personal reflection, discussing the essay strengths and weaknesses and limitations. How well did I do it? Could I have broadened it in one area? Could I have written a bit more about something in one area? What did I learn from this? Would I do it differently in the future? And that's fine to do. Okay, no one's asking you to suddenly go back and rewrite it, but it's better. Once you get to the end, it's better you sort of say, well, I've done it now and I'm going to hand it in, but I'd like, maybe if I had a bit more time, I could have done a bit more in this area or something. Okay, so that's fine. So that's in your reflection. So it's a critical reflection, but it's a good thing to do. It's something we should always do. Okay, the final brief, which is one I must admit isn't used very often, but you do have the option to use it. Okay, lots of people tend to either choose the literature review, that's very popular, or the the one people who like writing essays will do the essay. But this, for those of you, the scientists amongst you who like to do studies and experiments, really, you can do that approach as well. And this is in a report with appendices. The report is about 3 to 3,500 words, evidencing a small scale study that you do with some participants. So you need a handful of people that you can do a piece of work with. It needs to be in an area agreed with the tutor, again, with myself. So don't start this without checking with me because it just might not be appropriate, some of your ideas. There is a structure that I'd like you to follow because again it's all mapped to the criteria, and if you do follow it you really should meet the criteria, okay, which is vitally important. Nice title page, usual sort of thing, name, education, institution and date. Contents page, as I said, Word will create that for you, and that's because it's a study, it's not an essay, so you can have lots of headings in it if you want into different sections. A little abstract executive summary, about 150 words, just summing up what you're doing, why you're doing it, what sort of methods you're going to use, um, and the findings. So you sort of you often go back and write the abstract afterwards because you might not have done all your research, what your conclusions are. Okay, so the headings that are important. Introduction, usual sort of thing, 150 words. Why are you doing the study? What's the context? What reason have you chosen this? And you also need to tell me what's the scope of it? How big is it? How many people are you talking to? What's included? What is not? So say you're doing a survey with a group of 6 people, maybe 6 other students or 6 colleagues that you work with. You just need to identify why have you chosen them? Are they random? Did you choose them for a reason? Is it because they all like football? You tell them about football? I don't know, something like that. Okay, so what's your purpose? You need a little literature review, small one, good paragraph, but at least 500 words because it's very hard to do a literature review, much smaller. You need to review at least 3 relevant sources of information, at least 3. You can do a bit more if you can fit it in. That relate to the study that you're going to do. So if someone's already done some work on this, so again, if you're doing a survey on people's views, if you're doing a survey on maybe using a piece of social media, you might want to get people's views on this aspect of social media or something like that. That's just an example. It could be anything. Um, you need to have had a review, see if anyone's done anything like it before, and and if they have, well, what are you doing that's different? Think carefully about that. Again, as it's a literature review, you either organise it chronologically or thematically, and with the work that's been done before, you need to look at the strengths and weaknesses of that. Okay. Then you go on to look at your methodology, which is the main body, 1,500 words at least. Justify your sample. Was it convenient? Was there a purpose for it? What sort of ethical considerations? Remember, when you're doing research, you should always consider the ethics of it. And you need to discuss that with me if there are any possible ethical issues about asking people questions. Okay, run it by me, or run the questions by me. What sort of method have you got for data collection? Are you doing interviews? Are you doing questionnaires? Are you doing a focus group? Are you measuring people doing something? Are you doing some general observations? Maybe you're doing observations and you're not telling people. If so, we definitely need to discuss the ethical point about that. Okay. Um, if you are doing observations and you are telling people, or if you're involving people in certain ways, you might need consent forms. You certainly might need consent forms if you're asking them questions and you're going to use their opinion, and you might publish it, or it's in a way it is being published because it's going to be on the college server here. Okay. And whatever tools you create, like surveys, questionnaires, and that, I need a copy of it in an appendices as well. 150 words of results. What data have you gathered from your study? You can use graphics, you can use charts. That often works better if you're producing data. 250 words of discussion. So once you've created your data, you want a bit of analysis and interpretation from your study. Okay. Have a look back at what your aims of your research, are you meeting it? Were there any problems? Did it go off in a different direction? Did some of people's responses, were they really not what you expected at all? So then a conclusion, about 150 words. Sum up the key points from the results from your discussion. Again, reflect on whether you're answering your research question, whether you've met the aims. Nice summary. Any wider implications? Could this be used elsewhere? Could this survey go larger? What would you recommend? Okay. And then 200 words, a little evaluation. Again, this is your reflection on you. What are the strengths and weaknesses of what you did? Was your sample size too big, too small? Did you ask the wrong people? Did you ask the right people? What are the key points that came out of it? Did it answer your question? What would you do next time? Would you do it differently? Was your survey okay? Would you rather do it face to face next time, or the other way around? Whatever. Okay. So that's a small scale study. As I said, not a lot of people choose this, but there's nothing wrong with you doing so. It's not a problem. Some people really like doing little studies, but the thing is, it can be a bit more time consuming. But it's fine if you've got the time and space to do it. Appendices for that one, same sort of thing as we've had before, the other briefs. References, including AI generated. Your initial research proposal, brief commentary on how you refined it, what sort of discussions we had, how you put your methodology together, why you sort of chose the survey instead of this, or how you addressed any ethical considerations. Remember, don't forget, because you're doing a scientific study, ethics with people, if you don't do it with people, then maybe you're all right. But if you're doing it with people, there may be ethical considerations. So I want to see you address that. And your research plan, again, you can do it in a little chart form if you want. Key milestones and the dates. Consent forms if you've needed to use them, and any data collection instruments, so any surveys, questionnaires, anything like that. I just want a copy of them in the appendices. Okay, so that's the third option. So remember, for all three options, what's important is to follow the structure that I've laid out for you. If you follow the structure, then you are going to meet the criteria. I mean, you may not, you may meet some criteria better than others, but if you do follow those structures, you should at least meet the criteria. So that hopefully you should get your pass at least. How well you meet the criteria is how well I grade you, okay? Citations and references need to be in Harvard format. Don't deviate from that, please. And don't forget your AI referencing as well. References and appendices must be there. Just because they're in appendices, they're not optional, the ones that I've identified. And they are not covered in the word count. But please don't make them so huge that it's another 6 hours for me to read, okay? But hopefully they're just a couple of sheets. Proofread everything before uploading. correct grammar, spellos, anything like that, please. And do check to see you have met all the criteria. As I said, if you use the structure, you should at least have addressed the criteria. But it's really important. It's good practice for you to think, have I met the criteria? And you've got the criteria in your brief, so you can look them over. Before you start this assignment at all, talk to your tutor about the topic you want to do. Me in this case, but could be another tutor if I'm not here. Talk about the topic that you want to do and which brief you want to do, but have some reasoning why before you actually talk to me about it. So, give that some thought. Don't just stab at it and, I'm going to do this. Have a little think about why. Maybe I'm more comfortable writing essays. Maybe literature reviews are interesting. Maybe I'd like to have a go at a study, Okay, so just think about why. And then we need to marry the topic and the brief, because, the study one might not work with every topic. The literature review might be better off for the a study. So think about it, okay? But I'm happy to guide you. So all you do once you've got some ideas is contact me. Okay, well, that's really it then. So the thing is that you are on your own. You're not using our teaching stuff. Although if you do look in study skills, those of you who haven't done the research bit yet, there's a good bit about literature review that can be quite helpful. But you can find lots of stuff on Google about doing a literature review and about doing a piece of research. But if you're not sure, again, talk to me. So we can give you that sort of guidance. It's just in the end, the choices are yours and what you put in it is yours. So you're not really putting stuff that's in the sort of regular week by week resources. Okay. That's it. So good luck with that. And yeah, as I said, contact me if you want to discuss it any further. Thank you. Bye.